Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. If you come here for stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. Today I'm sharing a story I've never told anyone, a story about a secret, a feeling I never expected, and how one moment in the kitchen changed everything. My name is Jessica, and I'm 22 years old. Just a few months ago, my life was turned upside down. I moved to another city when my mom remarried a man named Frank, and suddenly I was in a big house with people I barely knew. My mom and I were no longer alone. It was a whole new family. My stepfather was kind and welcoming, but I felt out of place, like I didn't belong. Then my stepbrother, Travis, came along. He was only a year older than me, 23, and had a quiet, thoughtful energy that intrigued me. He had a passion for photography, often disappearing with his camera to capture moments in the city. Travis had an enigmatic, almost detached look, as if he was always immersed in thought and saw things others didn't. He wasn't cold or unfriendly, but there was something about him that made me feel like he was hiding something, perhaps just protecting himself. I was going through a lot myself. I had just left my old life, my friends and my boyfriend in the city. Our relationship hadn't been going well for months, but ending it and moving to a new place was harder than I thought it would be. I felt so alone. Most days I was withdrawn, reading or watching TV, but that all changed one night in the kitchen. I was drinking tea late, around midnight. My mind was swarming with thoughts of home, of everything I had left behind. I decided to make myself a cup of tea, hoping it would help me relax. I tiptoed down the stairs, not wanting to disturb anyone. The kitchen was dimly lit by the light of a street lamp, casting soft shadows across the room. I put the kettle on and leaned against the counter, looking at the billowing steam. The silence was soothing, giving me a break from my thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, I felt someone's presence behind me. I turned around startled, and Travis was standing in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his eyes still heavy with sleep. He looked at me in surprise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly, his voice a barely audible whisper in the silence of the room. I managed a weak smile. "Yeah, thought a little tea might help. Sorry if I woke you up." He shook his head, retreating further into the room. "No, you didn't wake me up. I was awake anyway." He walked past me, holding out a glass of water. We stood side by side in silence for a while, both of us feeling a quiet tension. I could feel the warmth emanating from him, and it made my heart beat a little faster. He looked at me, his gaze lingering. "You look different here," he said, as if thinking out loud. I looked at him, a little surprised. "Different?" "Yeah," he said, taking a sip of water, more relaxed. "Like you're mentally somewhere else." I sighed and nodded. "It's just a lot to move here, to leave everything behind. I feel a little lost, to be honest." He was silent, just listening. It felt good to talk to someone who wasn't part of my old life, who didn't know all the sordid details. Do you ever get that feeling that you're waiting for something, but you don't know exactly what it is? I asked, leaning on the counter. Travis met my gaze and nodded slowly. Every day. We stood like that, lost in each other's eyes, until he stepped closer and placed his hand on the counter next to mine. For a moment, I didn't realize what was happening. It seemed surreal, like a scene from a movie. His fingers lightly touched mine, as if testing them for strength. My breath caught, and I lifted my head to see that he was looking down at me, his eyes dark and intense. My heart was racing. Every nerve in my body was awakened by his gaze, and it was a whole new sensation. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice low, almost uncertain, but he didn't pull away. I felt myself drawn to him, drawn by that quiet intensity. I leaned in to shorten the distance between us, and his hand found mine, our fingers interlocking, a silent acknowledgement of what we both felt but hadn't dared admit before. Before I realized it, he leaned in, and his lips were inches from mine. My mind was screaming at me to pull away, to stop before we crossed a line we couldn't cross anymore. But my heart was telling me to stay, to see where this moment would lead, and this time I listened to my heart. When our lips met, it was soft, tentative, as if we were both afraid to break the spell. Goosebumps ran down my spine. It felt so natural, like we'd been waiting for this moment. After that night, everything changed. We both knew what had happened between us, but we didn't talk about it. Instead, it became our little secret that we shared in the silence of stolen moments when no one was around. Late at night, I would return to the kitchen, hoping he would join me, and he always did, as if he knew I was waiting for him. One afternoon, everything changed again. I was sitting in the living room, absent-mindedly leafing through my phone when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Derek, my ex-boyfriend, standing there with a reassuring smile. He had come from out of town to talk things over, hoping we could patch things up. His sudden appearance caught me off guard, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt the old familiar affection, but I could feel Travis watching me from across the room, and the expression on his face was unreadable. Derek walked in, took my hand, and led me to the couch. I could see Travis' jaw tense as he watched us from the kitchen, and the grim expression on his face. I could feel the tension in the room like an electric current. Derek started talking, trying to explain why he had come, but my thoughts kept returning to Travis, and I couldn't focus. Later that night, when Derek left, I found Travis waiting for me in the kitchen, stormy-eyed and arms crossed. He looked at me, and the familiar warmth was replaced by something colder and sharper. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket and gestured for me to follow him outside. We walked in silence to his car, the night air thick with tension. I didn't know where he was taking me, but I trusted him, feeling like he needed to get out of the house, away from reminders of Derek's visit. After driving for a while, we came to a secluded spot by an old abandoned factory. Moonlight softly illuminated the crumbling bricks and broken windows. He parked, and we sat in silence before he finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "Why didn't you tell me he was coming?" His words were smooth, but I could feel the pain behind them. "I didn't know, Travis. He just showed up," I said, reaching for his hand. "You know it's over. I don't feel that way anymore." He lowered his gaze, his hand still tense in mine. "Just seeing him with you made me realize I can't keep it a secret anymore. I want you. I want us." My heart raced at his words, and my chest clenched with fear and excitement. As I nodded, I heard some rustling coming from the shadows. Travis' eyes widened, and he instinctively pulled me closer. "Who's there?" he called out, and his voice echoed through the silence. A figure emerged from behind the rusted remains of an old truck, a man with a stern expression and a gun glinting in the moonlight. "You think you can just come here and make out on my property?" The man grinned, a threat in his voice. My heart raced in my chest, fear gripping me. Travis slowly raised his hands, trying to defuse the situation. "Look, we didn't know. We were just passing through," he said, his voice calm, though I could feel his body tensing against mine. The man took a step closer, and I saw the wild, dangerous look in his eyes. "Passing through, are you? This is no place for love games." He gestured with his gun toward the factory. "Come inside. Both of you." My blood ran cold, and I saw Travis looking for a way out. He turned to me, his eyes full of both apology and determination. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, squeezing my hand. We got out of the car, and the man guided us to the broken doorway of the factory. Inside, everything seemed to be engulfed in shadow. The air was damp and musty, filled with the echo of our footsteps. A man circled around us like a predator. "You picked the wrong place to mess around," he growled, waving his gun between us. My heart was pounding, thoughts of escape flashing through my mind. Suddenly, Travis lunged, grabbing an old metal pipe from the ground. He swung it at the man, and the ringing echoed through the emptiness of the factory. In the chaos, I ran, ducking behind a pile of rubble. I heard scuffling, grunting, and the heavy thudding of bodies against the ground. I looked out just as Travis managed to knock the gun out of the man's hand. It whizzed across the floor and landed a few feet away from me. Without thinking, I lunged toward him, and my fingers touched the cold metal. I raised my gun and with trembling hands took aim at the man pinning Travis to the ground. "Stop," I shouted, my voice shaky but loud enough to block out the noise of the fight. The man froze, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me and then at the gun in my hands. "Let him go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Slowly raising his hands, the man backed away from Travis, his face contorted in a grin. Travis rose to his feet, his eyes looking up at me, filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "Jess, put the gun down," he said softly, taking a cautious step toward me. My hands were still shaking, adrenaline bubbling in my veins. I looked up at Travis, at his affectionate eyes, and slowly lowered the gun. Travis took it from me and tossed it far across the factory floor, the rumble resounding in the void. He pulled me to him and hugged me tightly. "It's okay," he whispered, his breath warming my hair. The man jumped to his feet and ran, disappearing into the darkness. We stood there hugging each other for a long time, realizing the gravity of what had happened. After that night, everything changed again. We realized that we couldn't keep sneaking out to meet people, not when things had gone this far. A few days later, we worked up the courage to tell Mom and Frank together. As we stood in the living room, hands clasped together with our hearts pounding, I looked at Travis, who smiled encouragingly at me. This was it. We were about to open our lives and share something deeply personal and precious. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, we were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Derek. He was back, and this time he looked determined, almost desperate. "Jessica, we need to talk," he said, his voice full of urgency. I exchanged a glance with Travis, who looked as stunned as I was. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. I knew I had to make a choice that would determine the course of our lives. As Derek stood beside me, his eyes filled with such tension that my stomach twisted, I realized that if we were going to move forward, we had to face everything. The secrets, the fears, the danger, face to face. And I knew that with Travis by my side, I was ready for whatever came next.